In today's episode, the IMF predicts slowing growth, Lula goes to China, and the US ramps up its military presence near Taiwan. The International Monetary Fund has predicted that most countries will avoid a recession in 2023, but are forecasting some of the slowest global growth in decades. Despite market volatility, increasing uncertainty after severe inflation, and several bank failures, the IMF named their April 2023 report a rocky recovery. The group is forecasting global real GDP growth at 2.8% for 2023 and 3% for 2024, down from 3.4% in 2022. Notably, this is 1 percentage point less than the estimates they made in January. In concrete terms, GDP growth in the EU is essentially stagnant, US growth stands at 1.6%, and so-called emerging markets such as China are forecasting growth above 5% according to IMF figures. Inflation is expected to hover around 7% this year, down from 8.7%, with predictions that a further drop to 4.9% globally will take place in 2024. According to a statement by IMF officials, quote, "Inflation's return to target is unlikely before 2025 in most cases." They further state that, quote, "The global economy remains on track for a global recovery from the pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine," end quote, despite skyrocketing profits for massive private enterprises across the two events, especially in staple industries. Follow the money and the story is clear, says Robert Reich, the former US Labor Secretary. He continues, saying, "Food corporations are using inflation as cover to jack up prices." His assessment is correct. The same is true with fuel, electricity, and virtually every other service we need on a daily basis. Regarding the failures of two US regional banks and the forced merger of Credit Suisse, the IMF has stated that the risks and potential consequences have been contained by policy actions, despite continued, quote, "volatility." Interestingly enough, similar things were said prior to the 2008 global recession. The US Treasury said in a statement that talks would look at maintaining solvency within banks, mostly through higher lending, which could amount to as much as $50 billion over a 10-year period, a massive sum effectively underwritten by governments and taxpayers. All of this marks the continuation of a trend within capitalism, in which losses are socialized and pushed onto the entire population, while record profits are collected to the detriment of everyday people. After over 100 years of experience with economic downturns and recessions, capitalist orthodoxy still struggles to justify events that destroy millions of lives, in a system with inbuilt boom and bust cycles. Brazilian President Lula will be paying a state visit to China this Wednesday through Saturday. Around 20 bilateral agreements are anticipated to be signed during the trip. It's expected that Lula's visit will deepen bilateral relations between the two countries, with high likelihood for the two sides to make a number of agreements on trade and investment, finance, infrastructure, and on the Belt and Road Initiative. The US and the Philippines reportedly began their largest ever military drills on Tuesday, involving more than 17,000 troops from both sides. This comes as a continuation of the show of force between China and the US State Department in the South China Sea, as tensions rise over Taiwan. American military presence in the Philippines is significant, with 4 new bases expected to open soon, some of them located on the closest possible piece of land to the island of Taiwan. Filipino protesters have been seen burning US flags in protest of what they see as US belligerence. In Spain, last month marked the country's second hottest March of the 21st century, with the lowest level of rainfall in about 30 years. Despite freezing weather at the start of March, the temperature for the month was 1.8 degrees Celsius above average. This was accompanied by unusually dry weather, with the average rainfall over mainland Spain barely touching 36% of the normal amount the country usually gets in March. The Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge said that due to the alarming weather, the country remains in a state of persistent drought, which began at the end of December 2022. The hot, dry weather has also resulted in an early start to the wildfire season in Spain. Russian mobilization has gone digital. As physical delivery of draft papers becomes progressively easier to dodge, summons will now be sent electronically to a potential draftee's personal account on the main government portal. The documents will be considered delivered as soon as they show up in your profile. in effect, making draft dodging impossible. Myanmar's military has admitted to carrying out an air attack on a community hall in the central Sagaing region that reportedly killed at least 50 people, including women and schoolchildren performing dances. The building was bombed by a fighter jet, which was followed by helicopter gunships targeting any survivors. In a surprising interview, French President Macron has called for the EU to reduce its dependence on the US and to become a third pole in world affairs alongside Washington and Beijing. His statement has received both criticism and support from various EU governments, depending on their reliance on the US versus potential benefits of closer ties to China. This shift in rhetoric marks a continuation of the march towards a potential multipolar world. In tech news, Twitter CEO Elon Musk says the company is now breaking even, after firing 6,500 staff, from 8,000 all the way down to 1,500. This is the latest baffling move by the billionaire owner, who seems to be completely at odds with his entire staff, as well as the majority of Twitter users. Two of the most interesting news stories coming out of the massive US intelligence leak are Serbia's potential involvement in selling weapons to Ukraine, an unexpected twist as it's the only European country that has directly refused to sanction Russia due to its deep historical and cultural ties, and the long-suspected confirmation of NATO special forces operating in Ukraine. The largest contingent is from Britain, followed by NATO members Latvia, France, and the US. In positive news, a new national law for, quote, real and effective equality for trans people came into force in Spain on March 2, 2023, allowing a person to change their gender identity in the civil register without undergoing a 2-year hormonal treatment or obtaining a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, as required by previous legislation. Trans rights remain a contentious issue in places like the US. Nevertheless, there is progress being made towards a more equitable world. That's all for today. We'll be back day after tomorrow with more news. If you missed them, be sure to check out our previous episodes by following the links on your screen. As always, you can support the show and get the news in text form a few hours early by becoming a patron at patreon.com/firstthought.